listener production.
Hello, Bension Siebert here with The Briefing. And goodbye to fact-checkers on Instagram and Facebook.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. We're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. It's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is scrapping fact-checkers as he does everything he can to join other corporate execs, bending the knee to incoming US President Donald Trump. Does this have anything to do with Trump's threats to jail Zuckerberg for life for alleged US election interference? Trump says probably.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably.
But whatever Zuck's motivation, what is this going to mean for our feeds? It has to be said, you can see plenty of bullshit on Facebook and Instagram, even with the fact-checkers right now. So will this make no difference? Or are these people holding back a flood of absolute trash that we're really not prepared for? That's particularly important in Australia right now, with a federal election due in the next few months. And if Meta won't check facts for us, how can we protect ourselves from misinformation and lies on social media in 2025? Stephen Shearer knows Mark Zuckerberg. He's a former CEO of Facebook in Australia and New Zealand, and he's here to help us understand what this is all going to mean. Stephen, thanks for joining us on The Briefing. Why is Mark Zuckerberg doing this right now?
I think it's pretty obvious. It's the winds have changed, the political winds in Washington. Trump is now in power, and Mark has decided I need to get back on the right side of the current way the winds are blowing. And Mark has said this himself. And this sort of third-party content moderation was a sticking point for a lot of Trumpian and Trump administration people. So I think Mark's saying, I'm going to get ahead of this and get this out of the way.
Why was it so important for him to do this right now? Why does he need to appease Donald Trump?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people are saying, what do I do to appease Donald Trump, including places like Canada and Greenland now? Well, look, Trump's unpredictable, but there's no question he's coming back into power with, at least in his mind, a mandate to do some things that are, more radical, maybe more dramatic, and more in line with the philosophy that Trump espouses around all kinds of things, like around tech regulation, around how freedom of speech works. He's got Elon Musk in his ear, who's a very powerful advocate of a kind of idea of freedom of speech as Musk would define it. So, this is why Mark is making this move now, to try to move in that direction quickly to get back. I think with the Biden administration, it was more, the wind was blowing a different way, which was more around third-party content moderators and trying to keep these platforms from spreading misinformation. The current administration doesn't have a problem with misinformation the way the previous one did, so Mark's getting in front of this trend.
Zuckerberg has said that Meta's fact-checkers are or have been too politically biased and destroyed more trust than they've created. Do you think that's true?
I heard what he said. I think you've got to listen to this with the ears of the audience. I think in this era of Donald Trump back in power, the audience for that message was Donald Trump. I don't think it was you, me, anyone else. I don't think Mike really believes that. Look, there's bias in every human being. There's bias in systems. There's bias in AI. Were Facebook's fact-checking systems more biased against conservative views? The research has shown that that's not actually true. Third-party evidence shows that that's probably not true. But I think Mark saying it simply appeases Donald Trump and makes Trump feel like Mark is falling into line behind him. So I don't think Mark thinks it's true, but he's going to say that so Donald Trump can hear it.
Talking about third-party moderators, this is a group of people who've been inside the tent in Facebook deciding in some way what gets up and what doesn't get up. Is it the right call that I guess you would call the people should be the ones who are moderating what's true and what's not true on social media? Or do you think that kind of third-party regulation is what should be the standard?
Yeah, this is a really thorny problem. And I think reasonable people can come down on both sides. in essence, there's three ways to moderate social media platforms. So one is no moderation. Essentially, you can put anything out you want on that platform and nobody takes it down. Nobody says anything about it. And there are platforms that work like that. The not major ones, but there's smaller ones that do. But they have all kinds of problems. And that is not, nobody's considering that first option. That is really not an option for big platforms. So that leaves two other options. The two others are you can have community moderated, so somehow users moderate themselves, or there's some sort of third party that moderates it. Either the platform itself employs moderators or fact checkers, or it engages with a third party organization. So Facebook does a mix of internal people plus external people, third news organizations, and actually fact checking not-for-profits that they use. And there's literally thousands of people involved in this, and there's lots of technology involved in it. So there's three different ways to do it. The first is not under consideration, but the other two, you can see reasonable arguments for both. So, one is the Muskian argument that says, hey, the community should moderate itself. There should be no third party that's being influenced by its own biases. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. But others would say, no, these platforms are too big, too powerful, they have too much influence on how information propagates and how opinions get formed in societies, particularly democratic societies. And therefore, there needs to be some control, some moderation. Now, it's really hard to get the balance right. I don't think Facebook wants to be moderating things. I actually don't think they want to be, but they know that they have to. The trouble is, wherever you draw the line, somebody's not happy. And often, that's somebody powerful. It's one side of politics or the other. So it's a really hard problem to solve. And I don't think it's not solved today. And I would guess that in 10 years' time, we're still going to be having this conversation because there'll still be debates on both sides of politics about what's the right level of control or moderation and what's the right level of freedom.
You've known Mark Zuckerberg in the past. Give us a little bit of a behind the curtain. What are his personal politics? And is he the kind of person who wants to impose his personal politics on these platforms, or is he just sniffing the wind and seeing what works?
That's a great question. I don't know if imposing his politics is the right way to think about it. However, if you look at this generation of tech billionaires that have come up over the past 10 years or so, there's a few things that are common about them. One is they're very young when they get powerful and they get rich, right? I mean, Mark, Elon, Jeff Bezos, they were all billionaires in their 20s. Even Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they were billionaires very young. So that's one thing. The second is the nature of how they earn their power, particularly in the world of social media or the internet. It gave them more influence over society or over others than the billionaires of the past had. If you build a steel mill, you didn't really affect how everybody lived their lives. But if you build an internet shopping site like Amazon, or you build a social media platform, you influence a lot of people. You can influence governments, as we're seeing today. And so this combination of youth with enormous wealth, with enormous power, and it is enormous wealth compared to even past generations, I think it infuses in them a sense of idealism, because I think they're very. I think Mark. I don't know Elon Musk, but I think Mark is I think he's quite an idealistic person. But one person's idealism is another person's dogmatism. It's all in the lens of the beholder. And Mark does live in a bubble, right? These guys, we all live in bubbles, but Mark lives in a Silicon Valley, super rich bubble, and he doesn't experience the rest of America the way other Americans do. He doesn't see the rest of the world. And indeed, none of us can really see everything. But the power he exerts over the rest of the world or the rest of America is immense. And so I think he's dealing with this conundrum. He's well-intentioned. I think he's got good intentions. But the power of what he has, he doesn't even know how to control himself. To control its downsides and to maximize its upsides. It's that much of a beast, a wonderful beast in some ways. Social media has done a lot of great things in the world. But the downsides of it are so big that, it's clear that even Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, brilliant as he is, can't get a handle on them. And I think that is a frustration of his. I don't think he wants to have his platforms do harm, but he can't control the harm that they do simply because of the scale of the monster that he has created.
So let's turn to the impact that this decision to get rid of fact checkers might have on our feeds. There have been some pretty strong reactions today, but right now I am looking at a post on Facebook that falsely claims homeopathy is a treatment for cancer. What impact has fact-checking actually had on Facebook and Instagram to date?
Yeah. Well, third-party research will show that, just generally speaking, these two forms of moderation, one which is community-based, the other which is more expert third-party based. The expert third-party based one keeps misinformation from spreading more effectively. It is better at doing that. So the post that you saw, for example, would be less likely to be seen if it was third-party moderated. If it's community moderated, that is not as strong. The misinformation tends to flow a little more freely. There's different measures of this. There's different ways to look at it, but that's generally what the research shows. And is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's all in the eye of the beholder. I think there's some legitimate concerns about things like vaccinations, for example. Unfortunately, the fact that you don't want to get vaccinated is a problem for me, because we're a community, and you not getting vaccinated actually could cause problems for other people. So there's genuine issues here. I'm just picking on that as an example, but it's not just a matter of, hey, somebody says that the Brisbane Broncos won the grand final last year, but they didn't, right? That doesn't really matter. But if it's bigger issues that actually drive behavior, drive decisions, drive violence in some cases, yeah, that can become a big problem. So it is a concern for society, and it's even a concern commercially for these platforms as well. And in terms of regulation, the European Union is not happy about social media platforms that don't control their content very well. So Meta is going to have problems with the EU with this decision, just as X is already having problems. So I imagine that just saying, well, that's just a price we have to pay in order to get sweet with Donald Trump and the U.S. administration.
As well as getting rid of third-party fact-checkers, Zuckerberg said overnight that there would be more political content on Facebook and Instagram. He specifically picked out gender and immigration issues when he was saying that fact-checkers had gone too far and shown their biases. Can we expect a bunch more misogyny, transphobia, xenophobia on Instagram and Facebook going forward?
In one word, yes. You will see more with this new regime of more community-based moderation. As we've seen on X, that type of content does tend to burgeon and blossom more in those environments, as we've seen on X. So you will see the same happen, I would predict, with Facebook, Instagram, and the other Meta platforms.
The Australian government tried to pass a law forcing social media platforms to crack down on lies and misinformation. That failed to pass Parliament. Is there anything else that the government should or could be doing now?
I think it's a continuing, I sound like a politician here, but I think there is a dialogue that needs to be had continuously with these platforms around the expectations of Australian civil society and the Australian government for Australians, and I am Australian. In spite of my accent, I'm Australian. I do think we need to defend our sovereignty, our information sovereignty, our information ecosystem sovereignty. I think that's important. I think every country should be able to draw the line as to what type of content, what kind of information, what type of freedom of expression they should allow on those platforms. That doesn't mean each country is going to agree. Some countries might go more to the left, some more to the right. But I think each country should have the power to make those decisions, and not the platforms themselves. The platforms shouldn't be deciding for us. We should be deciding, and our government should be deciding. And we go to the ballot box to vote for that government and decide which one we want to support. There's no ballot box where I can vote or not vote for Mark Zuckerberg, right? I'm stuck with the platforms that I get, but our government should be stepping in. So where it falls, I'm less interested in, but I do think that we as a sovereign country should have a right to moderate these platforms if we so choose.
We're about to head into a federal election in Australia. Can we also expect a flood of political misinformation leading up to that? And what can we do about that as users to make sure that we're not getting strung along by something that's just not true ahead of this election?
Yeah. So one, I think with this change, you probably can expect to see more misinformation infecting the political environment. There's a slight blessing in Australia is that our political campaigns are short, which I think is good. In the US, they're very long. So the less time you have, the better in terms of controlling the spread of misinformation. What can users do? What can people do? I actually think fundamentally there's a lot of power that we can take ourselves, not just about, what social platforms we read or we interact with and what content we look at, but just, critical thinking, rational thinking about, does this seem, reasonable? Does this seem realistic? What are other points of view? I think that's, as a citizen in a democracy, I think that's something that we have to force ourselves and train ourselves to do, to listen to both sides of politics more rationally and to look at fact sets and be able to examine them from different points of view rather than just sit in our own stream all the time. Unfortunately, social media leaves us in our own echo chamber a lot of the time. But trying to get out of the echo chamber, I think I would urge everybody to at least try to find a way to get out of your echo chamber and find out what the other side is saying.
Elon Musk made a big gamble when he decided to reduce the amount of moderation on X, and that had a big financial impact. Advertisers fled. They seem to be coming back in some way now. But could this be the beginning of the end for Meta? Is this a big risk for Mark Zuckerberg?
I don't think so. I don't think it's that dramatic. And there's a couple of reasons why. One is that pretty much all social media platforms are moving in this direction of community moderated content. So Facebook's not going to be alone in that. So all the platforms will have the same type of problem, if you call it that, of misinformation. I think the types of advertisers that use Facebook are slightly different than the types that use X. And X is a much smaller platform. It's not as essential to advertisers. It isn't a must-have platform, whereas Facebook, Instagram are really must-have platforms for most advertisers. They can't, there's nowhere else to go. They have to use those platforms. Are we at a peak? Another way to frame your question is, are we kind of at a peak social media and it's going to decline? There's going to be a lot of changes over the next few years, I think, with social media, both through regulation, through these kind of culture wars, but also through the rise of AI and the ability of individuals to kind of opt out of a lot of the kind of worst aspects of social media, the advertising, the kind of doom scrolling, the echo chambers you get into. I think AI, in a way, is going to probably help with that to get us out of some of that stuff. And what you might see in the future is a much more kind of balkanized world of social media, where there's lots of social networks or sub-social networks that we're all part of, or you're part of a different group that I'm part of. And that might be the way the world goes. This idea of one gargantuan network that's like Facebook that everybody in the world is on, may just become a thing of the past. Things are changing. I think the habits of young people in some ways are changing. The access of young people to social media is being restricted in many places, like it's proposed here in Australia. And so you may not get young people coming through who are weaned on social media, and they may have a different view of these platforms and how invasive they are, how much effect they have on their mental health than we had. So a lot of things are going to change in the next few years. So we may be at peak social media today, peak social media, and the whole world may look very different in another 10, 15 years.
Stephen Shearer there. He is the former CEO of Facebook in Australia and New Zealand, and he's also the head of Omniscient AI. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We would love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow at 6. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.